So Greenland's in the news, which for me is kind of interesting because for some reason, as someone who worked on the Left 4 Dead series, I did a lot of research on Greenland at one point. I was doing a lot of research on flus and viruses and things that spread that could cause a zombie apocalypse. So a lot of what I do as a writer is often not bubble up what I'm actually working on, but I do a lot of research for it and then have that research manifest in like a simple little phrase, like how you would name a flu after a location or something and give it a nickname. And then create a whole history of where that could come from, because there's some really interesting places in Greenland. There's Thule Air Force Base. It's now called, what is it called now? Pituffik Space Base? I could be saying that wrong. And it's just called that now because it's dealing more with space issues than just what it was originally created for. It was originally created to help the Danes protect themselves from Germany. If Germany was ever going to be attacked, we would defend Greenland. The U.S. would. And then under NATO, we've expanded that, made it an Air Force base. It's a weird base for a whole bunch of reasons. So one of the things just is it's an Air Force base where the Danish flag and the U.S. flags fly side by side everywhere because of how it was created and kind of its purpose. But so, in particular, I can't find the article now because Google sucks. But back in the day, there was also an article about how when they built the base, they had moved some indigenous tribes there. They did. I have that. But those tribes got moved twice. And during that, one of the tribes put a curse on the base in the area. The tribes were later compensated, but still. Like, it is a desolate place. So these are hardy people living here. Thule Air Force Base is 1,000 miles, less than 1,000 miles from the North Pole. It's the only Air Force base that has no fences up because nobody's getting there. Nobody accidentally arrives at Thule. You can still find some people talking about their time at Thule. There was a whole really good website dedicated to this guy capturing people's stories of back in the 60s and 70s being on Thule Air Force Base. And some interesting stories there. That seems to be gone. All this is captured in a wiki someplace on a website that I used to work at, hidden from view, but I'm sure no one can even find it. But the thing that drew me to Thule Air Force Base is in 1968, a B-52 crashed right outside of there. So at the time, we were flying continually. B-52s were always in the air just in case something was going to happen. And the bomber crashed into the North Star Bay at Greenland, causing conventional explosives on board to detonate and the nuclear payload to rupture and disperse, resulting in radioactive contamination of the area. During the cleanup of that, the Danes and the Americans, because remember, the Danes say we don't have any nuclear things on any of their bases, and yet here we go. Yeah, that was a fallout. But ends up, they never found one of the parts. A secondary stage of a nuclear weapon could not be accounted for once the operation was complete. The pilot's aircraft was it initially. They were crashing. They all bailed out. 6 people successfully bailed out. 1 person did not because they were in the one seat that wasn't an ejection seat. That's a seat don't sit in. But it was deemed what's called a broken arrow, where it is it's a nuclear accident involving like military stuff, but it is not something that should go to war. It's actually kind of helped push the agreement on the measures to reduce the risk of nuclear war, a treaty we signed with Russia, because saying, hey. But ends up, it's still in the news. And in fact, as late as, I think, 2011, they were still fighting because a bunch of the Danish workers that went to go clean it up, they weren't really told what they were cleaning up because the Danes aren't allowed to have nuclear weapons on their property. And what was this doing here? What was it doing it at the base? Now, it gets a little hazy of was it just flying by? Was it really at the base? Blah, 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 blah. Clearly it was. But so the Danish workers in 2011, this is like, 30 years after, finally got 50 years, got some additional compensation and long-term health care because they had long-term health problems resulting in that. And so what happens when you do something like a cleanup like that in a ground that's cursed and you're not told about the dangers? I don't know. I thought it was an interesting place to pull from and do a what if. And then, I don't know, what you would call a flu that came from that. maybe you'd name it after Greenland flu. I don't know, maybe you'd shorten it. But yeah, the U.S. has had bases there for a long time. We are the protectorate of it. We signed, I forget the name of the agreement, we signed an agreement to protect Greenland. So if it hasn't been protected, it's our fault. But man, kids these days, they don't know their history or their video games. And damn, does Google suck. It is impossible to find all of the old research I had on this.